Welcome to this edition of the Suitcase Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Bob Bowman, and today I thought I'd share with you how I got into the world of cigar box guitars. I'll begin with what that addiction initially looked like, and I'll walk you through my journey from never having heard about them to joining my local cigar box guitar club. We'll talk about my love for woodworking and how free time can be dangerous if you have money to back it up. So, for the next few minutes, let's find a place in the shade, set down our suitcase and cigar box guitar, and enjoy the show. There I was, a fairly well off 54-year-old, finding myself scouring the side of the roads for hubcaps, old license plates, steel cans, discarded planks of wood, or pretty much anything I thought looked interesting enough to either put on or act as the body of a cigar box guitar. It was late February, and I had it bad. And before then, I never really even made it a point to target or visit any antique shops or thrift stores. But now, most of the owners recognize me and ask me about my cigar box guitars. I struggle to go anywhere that I wasn't thinking about my next build or experimenting with that $48 1 gallon can of oil that I was passing on a shelf in an international market on vacation in Nashville, Tennessee. All my life, though, I've loved woodworking. I drafted all my projects before building them. I love the process of watching something I thought of captured to scale in a drawing and then have it come to life. For me, that started in about the 7th grade and it carried over through the 10th grade when my shop teacher came to me. He told me, Bob, you can't take another semester of woodworking. You got to give the other students a chance. He suggested to me, why don't you take drafting? You're pretty good at making sure all your woodworking projects have been drawn out first. So why don't you enroll in the drafting program? Well, turns out I love drafting too, and that led me to a competitive slot as one of 24 different students selected from a pool of about 150 kids from across the 10 high schools in my county. And we were selected in an engineering drafting program to finish out the last 2 years of our high school experience. Well, upon graduation, I ended up doing electrical drafting for a local engineering firm called Fruin Collin Engineering before joining the Navy back in 1980. I spent the next 22 years in naval intelligence, where my woodworking was pretty much relegated to projects around the house like bookshelves and captain's beds or framing in a new closet or things of that nature. But I also enjoyed, whenever one of my sailors retired, making for them a 1700s era whaler sea chest. And I would make those out of large, wide pine boards and use 6-inch hand cut dovetails with rain lips on them, because these sea chests originally were meant to stay on the weather deck topside until it was time to pull out your hammock below and pull the guns in on the gun deck and put your hammock up for the night. Those made for some great retirement gifts for my sailors, and they were able to put all of their uniforms and their trinkets they wanted to save from their time in the service in them and have something nice to remember with. Well, anyway, 7 years ago, I found myself in a position with some free time. And my wife looked at me one afternoon and she said, well, what are you going to do with all this free time you now have? And I looked at her and my response essentially was, well, I've always wanted to learn how to play the electric guitar. And so she thought that was a great idea. And we promptly went over to the local guitar center and I bought an electric amplifier. And I then picked out a Les Paul Epiphone. And of course, they all have to have names, right? So I named mine Nadine. And shortly thereafter, I found myself back at the store buying a Jackson Dinky that I named Sylvia. And, with those in hand, still not knowing how to play, I needed to learn, how to play one, right? So I went online. I thought, I just need a quick riff, something that sounds as cool as these guitars look. So I typed in Eric Clapton and Muddy Waters plus blues riff. And I thought I'd get something really cool that'd come back like Layla or something like that. Uh, what came back at the top of the results surprised me. It was this long haired guy from North Carolina named Justin Johnson. And he was playing this 3-string electric shovel. I had no idea who he was at the time, but I was fascinated. And he made that 3-string shovel sound like it was a 6-string guitar. If I closed my eyes, I had no idea that this wasn't a real guitar, but it was what I call a post hole digger. Anyway, after a quick search down that rabbit hole, I discovered that he made and he played cigar box guitars globally. Once I saw that, I immediately knew what I needed to do. So, without ever having learned how to play the two guitars that are sitting right here off camera, that very next day, I set out to build myself one in my wood shop. Well, the problem is I don't smoke. So I needed to know how to find a cigar box. Best thing I could do was go on back online, and I found something called the Cigar Box Nation, which had a forum. And this forum of people were all trying to learn how to make and play cigar box guitars just like me. Unfortunately, I had to enroll and become a member before I was able to get my question answered. So when I woke up the next morning, having forgotten all about it, I picked up my phone and I saw that my application was accepted. And so I told my wife I was now a part of the Cigar Box Nation. And I gave this little look like this, and she laughed, but I knew this was the start of something pretty big, especially for me. Well, immediately, I went onto the forums again and asked, where can I find a source for these cigar boxes? What strings do you use? How are they tuned? And I had like 5 other questions, of course, that I could think of immediately without knowing any better. But within hours, I had an answer to almost every single one of those questions from someone named Gary Herget. And Gary Herget, it turns out, was not only from St. Louis, just like me, but he was the president of the St. Louis Cigar Box Guitar Club. It didn't take me long to become a member and to make friends, and I consider every last one of the members of that club my brothers. Well, interestingly enough, one of the builders that I had met that first day at the club was Russ Wellington. And Russ is a tall man. He's got a great demeanor, good sense of humor. But he saw that I was wearing my Navy ball cap and came over to introduce himself to me and said that he was also someone who served in the U.S. Navy. So we became instant friends. We consider each other shipmates and brothers. Turns out he's also a builder, but he's actually what I would consider a pretty good and an accomplished guitarist. He plays the bass guitar very well, and he really plays a mean cigar box guitar. Well, he looked at me and he saw that I was carrying my first ever cigar box guitar, which I happen to have right here. And if you're looking, you can see that this is a punch box. And the cigar brand is Punch. And it's got 4 holes in it that I drilled for sound. And of course, there's some perfect symmetry to it. Like I said, I was a draftsman. So these aren't randomly located. I put them exactly where I wanted them. I took one of my anchors off one of my uniforms and I stuck it onto the box and I named this one the Chief. I took a nut and a bolt to use as the bridge. Of course, I got it in the wrong spot and had to relocate it. I took a metal piece out of an old piece of electronics I had. I painted it purple in the same color as the design on the wrapper around the box. And I stuck 3 strings on it after putting it on an oak neck with some purple heart fret markers. This is a fretless instrument. And I used another bolt for the nut and some screws to hold the strings down, and of course some regular tuners on there. So as you can see, the string action is pretty high, and of course it's a slider, so not that it matters that much. But when I showed this to Russ, he looked at it and he strummed it a little bit, and as shipmates and brothers often do, he immediately started giving me some instant constructive criticism. And he says, "You know, Bob, there's two kind of people in this club." He said, "There's woodworkers and nuts and bolts guys. You're clearly a woodworker. Woodworkers make some great products. They all look nice. There's no question that your woodworking capability is solid." He said, "But for nuts and bolts guys, and we build too, we don't really care what it looks like as long as it sounds and plays well. And it needs to be played right." So immediately he told me he was a nuts and bolts guy, and he started giving me pointers. He said, "This scale length is a little short, should be a little longer." He said, "The string action, way too high even for a fretless. You don't need it to be so high. And it needs to be tuned properly. And a GDG or any of the other tunings for a three strings would work, EBE, so forth." He said, "You need to learn how to tune this thing right." And so he tuned it for me best he could, because it was really not well made as a playing instrument. I keep it because there's no way I could have shared that with somebody else. For sentimental reasons, I still hang on to it. But that brings me back to where I started this diatribe. Since then, I've come to know almost all the cigar shops in the St. Louis region. And now I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 plus cigar boxes, and I keep them everywhere. They're on shelves in my garage, in my wood shop, and in my closets. They're in cabinets. In fact, I've filled closets in my second floor of my house. The whole width of the room of the closet. And they're on the desk in my office here. They're on the shelves in my office. There's some on the floor. And, I don't look at them the way other people do. It's definitely an addiction. I consider them more like works of art than, say, a simple uh, wooden box. I've spent a ton of money on antique hubcaps, vintage gas cans and oil cans, old and new license plates, as well as just about every kind of interesting piece of hardware that I've come across that might even remotely work for a bridge or a nut or a decoration of some kind. And my wife, Chris, and I, we now enjoy going to those shops and stores looking for antiques, and as we like to call it, we enjoy going dumpster diving for things that make for an interesting cigar box guitar. And so that's actually my story. That's how I got into this art form or hobby or whatever we all want to call it. I love making cigar box guitars. I love talking to people that make and play cigar box guitars. And I actually love looking at all of the different designs that people come up with for cigar box guitars. So I'll close the episode there and just say thanks for joining me on this episode of the Suitcase Sessions. Join me next week as we take a look at what makes up a cigar box guitar and how is it different from a standard acoustic or an electric six-string guitar like we're all familiar with. So if you're enjoying the show, why not hit the subscribe button and follow us each week as we continue to explore the world of cigar box guitars. Until then, remember, there are no rules. Just keep playing, and we'll catch up later, somewhere down the road.